So with that, I want to thank you all for joining us for our final public policy hour discussion before the start of the 2022 Nebraska legislative session. Again, my name is Tiffany Seibert-Yakel. I'm Research and Policy Director at the Women's Fund. Today, we're going to have a conversation about access to reproductive health care and reproductive justice in Nebraska. I want to start with some level setting. At the Women's Fund, we trust people to make decisions around their own lives, and specifically their reproductive health care. We know abortion can be an emotionally charged topic for many reasons. However, the Women's Fund is rooted in the value of bodily autonomy, meaning that it is not our place to make decisions for someone else when it comes to their bodies and their health. Our work is also informed by the principles of reproductive justice, which focus not just on whether or not to have a child, but more broadly on how the ability of any person to determine their own reproductive destiny cannot be separated from the conditions of their community, and specifically the inequality of opportunities that constrict reproductive identity for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. That restrict the ability to control their own reproductive destiny. This applies to women, femmes, and non-binary individuals seeking essential reproductive health care. This conversation today will be rooted in those values. I want to be very clear. If you came to debate abortion access or people's ability to seek the health care that they need, this is not the space for you. Questions that are rooted in opposition to these stated values will not be elevated to the group. I want to be very clear about that. This space today is for a discussion about liberation and reproductive rights and reproductive justice, and we will hold to that firmly. So we're really excited to have that conversation today. We're going to start with an update on the legal landscape from Scout Richters, Legal and Policy Counsel at ACLU of Nebraska. As you well know, there's been a lot happening at the Supreme Court in this space. And so Scout will help us non-Supreme Court attorneys and judges navigate and know what we need to know about the legal landscape to better inform our advocacy here at the legislature and locally. And then after Scout gives us an update, we will invite a discussion about reproductive rights and justice, the existing policy and advocacy landscape, and how this work looks moving forward. We will be joined for that conversation by Ashlei Spivey of IB Black Girl and Dr. Sofia Jawed-Wessel of the Midlands Sexual Health Research Collaborative. So with that level setting, we'll just dive right in. I'd like to invite Scout Richters to join us and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. It's truly an honor to be here to share and learn. My name is Scout Richters. I am Legal and Policy Counsel at the ACLU of Nebraska, and I've been there for a little over 4 years now. ACLU is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization that works to protect and defend the constitutional rights of all Nebraskans, those rights that are guaranteed in the United States Constitution as well as the Nebraska Constitution. And we do this work through policy advocacy, public education, and litigation. So I specialize in gender equity and reproductive freedom work. So I get to work with the Women's Fund and our partners and our legislators to help to pass proactive bills and then defend against attacks on reproductive freedom and gender equity in the legislature. I also get to conduct trainings on things like breastfeeding rights for Nebraskans and the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, and then file suit if needed. And for example, in April, we were forced to file an emergency lawsuit against the Department of Corrections because they were blocking a woman who was incarcerated there from accessing abortion care. And we know that regardless of whether someone is incarcerated, they retain that fundamental right to make those decisions about whether to carry or terminate a pregnancy. And so we filed that emergency lawsuit and our client was able to get the care that she needed. But the bottom line is that it should have never had to come to that. The law is crystal clear and the Department of Corrections knew that. And I mention that because I think it's important to understand that these attacks on abortion rights and reproductive rights are part of decades of attacks by state legislators, and in some cases, other branches of government, as we've seen there. And it's just to chip away at these rights. And we're now seeing even more emboldened action against reproductive rights. So thank you for having me here.
Thanks, Scout. And thanks for all the work that you do at ACLU. Can you just start by telling us a little bit about what's been happening the last few months at the Supreme Court, for those of us who, care about it and care about working on this issue, but may not be able to follow all the inner workings and the legalese?
Of course. So currently there are 2 cases pending before the Supreme Court of the United States. So the first is SB 8, and that is a Texas law that bans abortion at 6 weeks before most people obviously would even know they're pregnant. It shut healthcare clinics down across the state of Texas. And what is so unusual about that law is really the enforcement mechanism. So it's really unprecedented because it puts enforcement of that abortion ban in private citizens rather than the executive branch. So what it does is effectively has citizens acting as bounty hunters to file suits against private citizens for accessing abortion or assisting someone seeking abortion with a $10,000 incentive per lawsuit. And that enforcement mechanism was really intended to delay court action to stop people from exercising their constitutional rights. And we see that goal has been realized. Just today, actually, the Supreme Court ruled that abortion providers could move forward in their lawsuit against the state. So the law was not blocked, but so that means that the law can continue to be in effect, and it will continue to harm Texas patients who will not be able to access that care. And they haven't been able to access abortion care for about 100 days now and counting. And so that unique structure of the law was the major issue. But the Supreme Court said that providers can challenge that law against certain state officials. But again, I just want to make clear that right as we speak, Texans aren't able to access the care that they're constitutionally entitled to receive. And so, we hear the saying that justice delayed is justice denied. And that is especially true, obviously, in the case of abortion with the time-sensitive nature of the care. And then turning to the second case, Dobbs v. Jackson Women's Health, and that was argued earlier this month, and a decision in that case is expected in June. And what's so important about that case is that this is the first time in 50 years that the court has agreed to hear a case directly challenging settled law related to abortion. The threat is very real. Mississippi has asked the Supreme Court to directly overturn Roe v. Wade by upholding a 15-week ban well before a pregnancy is viable. And the outcome will have certainly national implications if the court allows the state to enforce the ban. But we do have to be clear that regardless of that decision at the Supreme Court, Nebraskans' immediate future with respect to reproductive rights does in fact rest with those 49 state senators at the unicameral. So as we wait for a decision from the Supreme Court, the case law and the state of the law remains clear that Roe and the cases that follow it have all upheld that core principle that we have the right to make fundamental decisions about our lives and our futures, and that includes the right to abortion, and that is confirmed by 50 years of Supreme Court precedent. So that distinction has always been between pre-viability and viability, and the law makes clear that pre-viability, a state cannot put an undue burden in the path of a patient accessing abortion care, and that remains the law of the land.
Scout, I would echo Sophia's comments that you did that so brilliantly and beautifully and accessibly. So thank you for
Thank
providing
you.
that.
I try. It's hard. I know it's really
approachable.
hard to understand. So yeah.
There's a lot of moving pieces, right? Well, I just want to thank you for being such a brilliant legal mind and such a strong advocate and an incredible partner in this work. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, Sophia has a question. Scout, am I correct in understanding that if SCOTUS votes in favor of the existing Mississippi law, that states will be given full autonomy regarding abortion laws?
Correct. So it depends on exactly what they do. If they overturn Roe v. Wade completely, or they uphold it in name but allow this specific Mississippi law to go forward. But essentially, it opens the door for states to enact their own laws with respect to abortion.
And then Scout, we got another question. There has been some thought that if the Supreme Court does overturn Roe, that similarly settled law regarding LGBTQ plus folks could be threatened. Do you have any thoughts or?
You know, I learned in law school not to predict or pretend to speculate on what could happen, but I do think that that is certainly a concern when the Supreme Court is willing to look at this settled law that we've had and all the precedent cases that surround it and consider overturning something that is so fundamental. It brings about questions about all the rights that we have.
Well, thank you. If there are no more questions for Scout, I don't see any in the Q&A. Again, Scout, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so glad to have you. So we are going to turn the discussion a little bit to bring in Dr. Sofia Jawed-Wessel of Midlands Sexual Health Research Collaborative and Ashlei Spivey, founder and leader of IB Black Girl. And I would love to invite these two incredible people to tell us a little bit more about yourselves and what has brought you to this work and this conversation today. Ash, you want to go first? Oh, Sophia,
you go first.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I was going to tell Ashley to go first.
That's fine. I can go first. So hey, everybody that's here with us today. And thank you again, Tiffany and Women's Fund for having us. So I'm Ashlei Spivey. My pronouns are she, her, and I am the founder and director of IB Black Girl, which is a collective that creates space for Black women, femmes, and girls to access and reach our full potential. And, you know, I think for me, showing up in this world as a Black woman has really brought me to this work as we continue to dive into understanding maternal health and housing and wages, like all the things, right, that support and surround folks with the reproductive system. You can't help but be engaged in what this looks like and really fighting for power and choice in our processes and how we show up and how we want to actualize the life that we want to live. And so it's becoming more personal. Originally, I was like, you know, I'm a community organizer, like this is what I do. And then I'm like, but wait, this is really about me, my community, and people that look like me. And so I just appreciate the opportunity to be trusted, to be able to lead and support my community in this space. So thank you.
I am a professional. Okay, I'm here. I'm sorry. Okay, so yeah, I'm a professor at UNL in public health. I was really intentional about the field I wanted to go into. While I, my focus has always been sexual health. I chose public health because of reproductive justice. Bodily autonomy is the hill. Are we struggling with my internet?
A little.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm gonna move to a different spot. I'm gonna turn my video off and just get a little closer to the router. Of course, This is the time where I have that issue.
This is the world we live in these days on Zoom, so no problem, Sophia. I wonder if while Sophia's moving, we can come back and I want to hear her full brilliant answer, but while she's getting rolling, Ash, I think you sort of alluded to this in your intro, so it's a nice segue. Can you talk for us a little bit and help all of us understand the difference between a focus on reproductive rights, choice, and that aspect or foundation of the movement, and a broader framework and approach of reproductive justice?
Yeah, absolutely. And so there's a great resource by Sister Song that I can drop in the chat once Sophia starts her introduction again, around how do you really understand how these are not separate things, but really work together, and how we can unpack them and start to understand them. So for us, when we're looking at reproductive justice, it's really about our power and choice to be able to decide when and how we want to get pregnant, and if that even happens. And then how do we decide in the journey that we go on to parent and actualize what we want for our children and ourselves. And so reproductive justice are really all of those social systems that surround someone with a reproductive system, not just women, because we know other folks can have reproductive systems as well. And so that could be like housing, understanding voting rights, understanding the pay equity gap, the issues with childcare, right? Like all of those things really affect how we decide our journey around having a child or not, and then what does it mean to parent them. The access side is really about the access to the types of healthcare or options that we have, and are those limited or not, what barriers stand in that way. And again, if we are able to make those decisions around what we need and it's easily accessible, or that we're easily able to obtain them. And so, like I mentioned, they're not separate, but they work together, and making sure, again, that we have a comprehensive view on what does it mean for us as folks with reproductive systems to operate in this world.
Great. Sophia, let's try that again. So if you can tell us a little bit about yourself. We caught a little bit, but not a whole lot. So give us the whole scoop.
Yeah.
And then if you want to sort of go in or follow up on Ash's distinction or continuum of reproductive rights, access, frameworks, and reproductive justice, and how you approach it.
I'll tell you now, I don't, because Ashley is so freaking good at that like elevator speech now that there's nothing for me to add to it. But yeah, I come to this perspective from public health. I'm a professor in public health. I'm an educator and a researcher, and I chose public health as my avenue to understand sexual health and reproductive rights. Because of the justice piece, you know, public health like brings that in a way that other fields that are related to sexual health don't. And like bodily autonomy is just the hill that I will live and die on. Ever since I started doing research related to pregnancy and sexuality, and seeing the disparities in how to me, abortion just like this is encapsulates all of the things that I feel really passionate about. So that's why I'm here.
Great. Can you talk about, so we know that reproductive justice is a framework that was largely led by Black women and women of color. Can you talk specifically about the role, what is the role of white women in the movement for reproductive justice?
Is this for Sophia, Tiff?
It's for either of you.
Sophia, do you want to start? Is your tech working? You know, it's only because we're talking about this, her tech isn't working.
I know it. Someone
is it since I on the internet all the time, and yeah. Okay.
Oh, I think that's
I'm
better,
gonna stop
Sophia.
my video and see if that helps.
Yeah, that does.
Yeah,
let's just do that. Okay, you'll get to have this. Okay, you'll get to have this pretty picture instead. All right. So, as far as role of white women in reproductive justice, is that where we're going?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I think the biggest role of white women, the first thing that comes to mind is making sure that you are not speaking over and overstepping your lane, you know, that you are recognizing the role and expertise and leadership of Black women, Indigenous women, other people of color, but with the priority really being given to Black women here, because when we let those voices be heard and to lead and their expertise to shine, we're all going to benefit, And so if you're a white woman that's in a position of power, like a lot of what we've been seeing here in Omaha, like making sure that folks like Ashlei who are doing this work have the space, the money, the time, that's what your energy should really be going towards, in my opinion.
I will totally add to that, and like exclamation point a million times what Sofia is saying. I think it's hard because movement building takes everybody, right? Like you need everyone to play a role. And I think what we have seen, and especially in the history in this nation, is that our movements that are led by, catalyzed by, created by folks of color get co-opted, right? So like that goes into discussion around feminism versus being a womanist, you'll see even with the Women's March, right? Like all of these white women were coming with pink hats, and it's like, we need to unpack that because you're centering yourself in your experiences, yet you are able to navigate the world leading with your whiteness, which gives you a very different experience than women of color. And so I just reiterate what Sofia says, is that first you have to start with you. So don't come into this movement space unless you have time and have put in the energy to unpack what you bring to the space, your areas of privilege, right? And how you're working to decolonize yourself, and then start to think about, now, how can I uplift, resource, support Black, Indigenous, and other women of color in these spaces in the way in which that they said they want support, not by which you think you should give support. And that could look like, and I'll give a great example of Danielle with ACLU. Danielle, as a white woman, is really making sure in this reproductive space of how can we resource organizations, including Ivy Black Girl, around understanding advocacy, how folks can build that bench. Tiffany, your role, I tell Tiffany all the time, like Tiffany is so thoughtful about how she shows up in space and thinking about how policy is a lever and the implications around communities of color. And then what does it mean to be an advocate? Or sometimes I need you to check your people for me. I can't do it. And she is always willing to do that. And so those kinds of relationships and approaches are really important, but you can't even do that until you really start to understand how you show up and what that looks like.
I really appreciate that insight and the lovely words, Ash. I wonder, I just want to talk about this a little bit more because I just think it's important that folks really understand. Can either of you shed a little light? So Ash, you said reproductive rights are part of reproductive justice, but can you both speak to a little bit what we're missing? Again, how we're not looking at it fully if we are just focused on reproductive rights and choice, right? What are we, who are we leaving out in that movement if we just focus on choice? And
yeah, I think for me and the journey that I have been on in this space, when you think about movement building, is really around intersectionality, right? So from the work of Audre Lorde to Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, right? Black women and intellectuals and queer folks that have said, like, the things that we are navigating in community are not just siloed single issues. Like there's not just one approach, one thing, and then it's solved. It's really looking at all of our identities and experiences that allow us to have the experience with the world and the experience of the world has with us. And so when you're looking at repro justice, that's really the framework for all of this work and can really be the framework for any movement building, because it's taking a comprehensive look and has a set of agreements that says we are going to also think about abolitionist work. And so what does it mean for these systems that were built that were never built in the intention of, in this case, BIPOC women? What would it mean to dismantle and reimagine or rebuild versus to work within and trying to change? And that is an agreement that you have to grapple with, because women of color are the most impacted by what comes out of that system around reproductive access and rights. And so that justice piece really for me is that roadmap and really guiding framework of like, this is what it looks like to really show up holistically in the space, to think about the whole experience of a person with the reproductive system, leading with race, right? Leading with some of those other key identities, but knowing that it ripples and will impact everyone and make a difference for the kind of life and the ability to thrive for everyone in community.
Beautifully said. Yes. That's what I got.
Okay, great. I would encourage folks, I mean, I could ask questions of these brilliant people all day if you let me. So if you have questions, please go ahead and start tossing them in the Q&A and we can intersperse them through the conversation. So we're going to shift a little bit. We've talked a lot about framework and movement and set some context. I wonder if we could talk a little bit about the existing policy landscape in Nebraska. What are the existing policies that specifically impact reproductive health and abortion? So I would open it up to either of you to.
So Tiff, can I ask you a question as it relates to that?
Sure.
So I think, what I've been talking about has been like those corresponding systems and what does that look like? And I think even in the last legislative session, the work that Women's Fund did in leading around childcare subsidy expansion and like SNAP make a difference. So would you even be able to touch on that? Because I think, right, like those are adjacent policies that also make a difference. And again, you are one of the brilliant folks behind it.
You are so
I know
kind.
this is not my job to like take over your facilitation, but I mean, I feel like we all friends here. So
this
like
is a conversation. I'm here for it. Well, Ash, I appreciate that. And I appreciate you naming that work. I think I agree. I hope that our policy work is informed by a broader understanding of what it means to have access to the ability to parent as you see fit and have the resources you need to live the life you want in your community, in a safe community. So we did advocate on behalf of expansion of access to food assistance through the SNAP program and expansion of access to affordable childcare through the childcare subsidy program. Those bills both successfully advanced. Senator McCollister introduced the SNAP bill, and Senator Wendy DeBoer introduced the child care assistance bill. Both of those bills, with the support of probably a lot of folks on this participating in this call, advanced and are in place now for 2 years. So we're going to need to continue our advocacy to make sure those things stay in place are not temporary. We also did a lot of work supporting many other incredible groups around housing access and justice, and supporting housing stability, addressing the crisis of eviction that our community and communities across our state have experienced. So I appreciate you naming that, Ash, and give me an opportunity to talk more broadly about the systems that surround our decisions about whether or not to parent and how to parent.
So I'm trying to hotspot with my and I'll go back to turning my video off. Can't hear me. Great. All right. Video's going back off. You tell me, is it like you can hear me though now, right? Okay. Yes. The world doesn't want to see my face today. It's fine. It's fine. I showered for this, no big deal. So yes, thank you for that, Ashley, and for naming that holistic piece too around policy that's currently happening. Do we want to do a quick rundown of like what the landscape is like right now? And then Ashley, you go into some of the stuff that is going to be on the table with this legislative session. Okay. So the first thing I want to mention is that abortion is legal in Nebraska right now. Okay. We had Scout mention this, and I just really want to reiterate that. I think the only exceptions are Blue Hill, right, Nebraska, because they passed that city ordinance saying that abortion is illegal there. But there are no abortion providers there to begin with. And Hayes Center, which is a village where abortion is not legal. But beyond that, legal in Nebraska, we have several policies that do create significant barriers. I'll start with funding. Public funding is only available for abortion in cases of life endangerment, rape, or incest. Private insurance in Nebraska cannot cover abortion unless there is life endangerment. We have a variety of trap laws here that limit the space and staffing of abortion clinics that create some significant barriers, and also limits abortions to only be provided by medical doctors. So nurses here cannot provide abortions. And then probably one of the most significant is that we do currently have a post 20-week ban. And this one can get tricky to understand sometimes because there's a distinction here in that it's any abortion that is performed 20 or more weeks post-fertilization. So that's 22 weeks after the last menstrual period. So sometimes that can be confusing for folks who are like, is it a 20-week ban? Is it a 21-week ban? Is it a 22-week ban? So after 22 weeks from your last menstrual period, you can only get an abortion in cases of life endangerment or severely compromised health. And then there's only one clinic that will do a post 20-week abortion here. We also have a method ban here. So the use of a safe, effective, and commonly used method, dilation and evacuation, is only permitted in cases of life endangerment or severely compromised physical health. This is really unfortunate because this is a really safe method to use, and it's limiting what the tools that the providers have access to. We also do not allow telemedicine to administer medication abortion. And then the DOC is also really secretive and doesn't include on their website any policies that they have related to pregnant people. So we know individuals are routinely denied through a host of red tape for those who are incarcerated. But Scout can probably speak to that more effectively. But it's a really, really difficult thing to navigate when you're incarcerated and want an abortion because those policies are really unclear and all the red tape that exists. I think I covered the most of it. Did I miss anything, Tiffany? Anything big anyway?
No, I appreciate you giving that overview. I think sometimes we don't always have the full scope of all of the ways in which abortion access is limited. So I really appreciate that very thorough overview.
Yeah, and just I want to name that we were so lucky at Ivy Black Girl to utilize Sofia's brilliance and kind of her strategy and approach in synthesizing information, that we will be releasing some of this landscape analysis in some like digestible, nice toolkits on our website. So she's done one for abortion access, thinking about Black maternal health and like the economic impacts that are happening here in Nebraska, so that folks can easily go back to it as well. So I just wanted to name that we have that coming from Dr. Sofia as well. So in terms of, I think what's on the horizon, one, I would just want to name that like folks are trying to build movement around this. So we are actively in the background working with lots of key partners and organizations and leaders to think about and prepare for our legislative session in January. And so some of the areas in which we're looking at advocacy are really around repealing the telemed ban. And so that has been brought forward by Senator Hunt, and we're looking at that language and really trying to just repeal that ban in general, and then thinking about who can administer abortion. So not it being just an MD, but can nurse practitioners and other medical practitioners be able to support that process. And so I think some of the conversations that we have are really around how can we react and protect, right? Like be in the moment of what's happening at our legislature, but then also demand like a different future. Like how do we think really long-term of like, this is a state of reproductive justice and access that we want, and we're always working towards that, knowing that we may have to pivot and address some of the things that come up, like what's happening in Texas and so on and so forth. But that's really, I think, where the energy and kind of synergy is around those two opportunities.
Sofia, do you want to talk about anything that I know you were making some clarifications in the chat? Do you want to lift up any of that to the group?
Yes. So minors, yes, need parental notification. And if they want to circumvent that, it's a lengthy court proceedings where a judge has to rule, and it's something that is often not done in a timely manner. So significant barrier there for younger folks to obtain an abortion. And then yes, some ultrasound issues there as well. So we don't have you don't have to view your ultrasound. You don't have to, but the provider has to offer it and perform one. But I was unclear on that performing piece. So, but Chelsea made that distinction. So thank you, Chelsea. And yes, there's those waiting periods, all those kind of issues that a lot of the states have, that lattice work that is spread across the state. We are impacted by those as well.
Can I, so Ash, you have mentioned a couple times that this is, there's movement building occurring. And so for folks on the call who want to be involved, want to take action, how would you suggest they do that and they can support the movement that you're
Sure.
leading?
So definitely the other orgs that are on this call, looking at Planned Parenthood, ACLU Nebraska, Women's Fund, IB Black Girl, in terms of like organizations doing work that are doing more organizing around this, please get on their social media, get on their newsletter listservs, because there will be lots of information that's coming out. We are really actively working to build a reproductive justice, we meaning IB Black Girl, working to build a reproductive justice movement in partnership with the organizations that I just named, others that I didn't, and individual leaders that care about this work. And so there will be some information coming out hopefully before the holidays, y'all. I'm low-key starting to check out, so we're gonna see what happens. But if not that first week in January, I got y'all before the legislative session starts, really around what you can do. And so there was a day of learning and action that ACLU helped to host in partnership with that coalition, where we talked about what case was being heard that again would impact this. You can write letters to your senators. Like, there's lots of different avenues and ways that folks will uplift for you to get engaged, and it's just figuring out what works. Oh, thank you, Jill. Jill is good at this. She already put it in the chat.
She's great. I've been watching this.
Just like, yes, thank you for ways to get involved. And so again, don't feel like you have to do everything when we are carrying lived experience, right? What they say, 1 in 4 people know someone or love someone that has had an abortion. So like the proximity to this sometimes can be heavy. And so figure out what your work looks like in a way in which that you feel like you can add value and truly utilize your voice, and let that be that way. And the organizations that I named, and even in the links that Jill dropped, have different avenues. But I would say the biggest thing to start to think about is this legislative session, and really contacting and communicating with state senators around not impeding on our healthcare choice.
Could I piggyback off of what Ashley just ended with? I think it's really, really, really important that with this particular legislative session, that we not wait until a bill potentially hits the general floor. Okay, so we really want to speak out while anti-abortion bills are still in committee and during those initial hearings, because that's our best course of action in stopping these bills, right? And so a lot of times we think, oh, there's going to be another opportunity, and there's going to be another opportunity, and there are, right? That exists. And I think all of us who are in this world often like sound the alarm bells really early on, and it can kind of create a person who cried wolf type situation. But it really, really is important to get in on this work early, because once a bill hits the floor, if it hits the floor, we lose some of our power there at that point. This is when the senators are going to be arguing it. There's no more hearings where the public can make comment, and we can send those messages and those emails and make those phone calls still, but it's going to come down to the count. And our legislature is bipartisan, but they lean fairly anti-abortion. And so I wouldn't want us to risk waiting that long to be able to speak up. And the other piece that I would suggest for those who are thinking about how they can get involved and what they should and should not do, I would really want to emphasize that we really be mindful of the solutions that we come up with, particularly if Roe v. Wade is overturned or Casey is overturned, to really think about that the solutions that we're coming up, are they actually accessible to Black and Brown people, or do they impact them negatively in a way that they might not white folks? So I hear often that we need to make LARCs more accessible in preparation for losing Roe. And yes, I agree, we definitely need to do that, but we need to make sure that we are coupling that with increased access, with intensive provider training, that Black and Brown people are more likely to be coerced into LARCs, so if we have a provider who has good intentions, but still has that bias that Black and Brown people, especially Black and Brown young people, are more likely to experience an unwanted pregnancy, and we might not have abortion access. So let me really push this LARC on this person, right? We want to prevent that from happening too, so we don't want to take a negative situation and make it worse with these well-intentioned solutions. We want to make sure that we're really centering how these solutions that we are coming up with are going to specifically impact people of color.
Dr. Sofia, I think you so beautifully named, right, like how these movements are intersectional. So think about all the work with comprehensive sex ed, you know, and contraceptive access, like how all of these things work together in order to create the experience. And you can't just focus on one because, like you said, there could be unintended consequences and harm caused.
So I'm going to lift up a question we have in the chat for folks. Piggybacking off of Sophia's comment, do you feel there are any dangers in the promotion of reproductive rights, such as abortion in communities of color, sometimes seen in the placement of reproductive resources geographically, that can perhaps encourage notions of population control, specifically regarding the Black community? Is this something that the movement should be concerned about?
That is a perfect question. And I think you are absolutely right. And it's a yes and. So as we've started to think about this movement, we have brought that up, especially like myself as a Black woman, and then the population and community that Ivy Black Girl is representing. And what we've talked about specifically, again, from Black community, I can't speak for other communities of color, is that we've never had space to unpack the harm that the medical institutions have done to our community. We have not had a chance to talk about eugenics, to the pushing on like long-acting reversible contraceptives like IUDs that Dr. Sofia just saying, like all of these things, we have never really had a chance to address and try to reconcile that harm, and still leaning into the reproductive justice frameworks that say, like, we still need power and choice, right? No one can decide for us. And so what Ivy Black Girl is going to do starting in January, we actually have a slate of virtual town halls or meetups where we have Black folks, both nationally and locally, engaging in this conversation. So we're going to do an RJ, reproductive justice, and Black church town hall, because we know the impacts that religion have on communities, both, you know, can be negative and positive. And what does that mean for folks to lean into the conversation that we're having, that we should still have bodily autonomy and that we can make those decisions, right? Like that is a very mucky, messy area, and we haven't had a chance to talk about it. We haven't had a chance to talk about, like, how do we see reproductive justice showing up in our community? Like, just again, all of these spaces. And so we have about a series of 5 town halls that are looking at that, that really allow for people to move along in the movement, because you also just don't want to say, hey, get behind this because I said so. Like, that's not representative. That's not how this works. And so we want people that to have that opportunity, as well as saying and still demanding that, hey, we deserve and we want to have this autonomy. Like, you can't take that away because you have, right, this conversation happening over here. To what Sofia put in the chat, it's a yes and. And so, and I think having folks that are from the community with those lived experiences and identities makes a difference in that conversation. It's going to be really hard for white folks, right, to have that conversation, and the movement in general is heavily white, right? Like, that cuts people in and out and creates a level of distrust there, because again, they're not seeing folks that look like them, engaging them in a way that feels authentic and bringing them along. And so that is our plan. And we'll have a notice schedule. We know, I think folks are checked out. Like, I'm checked out and not checking emails and things. So we will have that list for folks to share out and participate, even if you're not Black. But again, we're centering Black folks in that conversation.
Sophia, anything to add? No. Any other questions? Again, I want to give folks an opportunity. That was a really important question. So thank you for asking, and thank you for answering, Ash. Any other questions attendees would like to put to our brilliant folks here? While we're waiting to see if there's any other questions, I feel like a lot of these conversations lately have been ones that can feel really dismal, and I wonder, you know, if you two can share a little bit about what brings you hope, what you're hopeful about, or what sustains you in these moments when things do look a little bleak.
So I'll give you, you know, we do get asked this, and I usually have a pretty hopeful response and a positive response to give. And I was sitting with this last night as I was reading transcripts from the arguments from SCOTUS, and I was feeling a lot of despair last night. I felt like I was back where I was in 2016 after the election, because this is exactly what I felt despair for last time. This is the future I had envisioned after 4 years of Trump. But I will say that my despair does actually give me hope. Okay. Like the despair itself does, because I know if I'm feeling it, a lot of other people are doing it. And it's in desperation that we actually take really innovative and extreme action, like needed action. It's when we feel like this, like we are right now, and like we probably will by June, when these court cases don't have the outcome that we want, that is likely to happen. I anticipate folks like Ashlei, folks like myself, and the people that we are organizing to feel that desperation, and in that desperation to really come up with some brilliant freaking ideas about how we're going to respond and to do it differently. We've relied so heavily on Roe that it has halted innovation for us, it has kept us relatively safe, and now we get to be really, really creative because we have to be. And I believe that we will be.
Ash?
I don't know, Tiff. I feel like this is probably going to sound pessimistic, so hopefully it adds value in the space. But like, we've been through some shit already, like that's, like, I think about my ancestors and my community and what we consistently navigate, not these big viral points in time, but just like our everyday existence and our survival. And it's like, I don't know, like we get through it, we figure it out, like we're resilient and we make it work. I remember when folks were thinking about from a racial justice issue around the Kyle Rittenhouse case. And when the verdict came out, and like a lot of white peers were like super upset, and I didn't even blink. Like I was unfazed, because I'm like, this is like, what are you expecting? And I think it shows the fragility of especially white people in this space. Like, people of color navigate these things every day, and our everyday existence can be heavy, yet we decide to thrive. We choose joy and we choose abundance. And that's where I try to really center myself. And so for the folks of color that are in the space, I guess, navigating, I would encourage you to decide what you lean into or not. Like, say, I'm not, nope, because you deserve to be happy and enjoy your family, have some good food, and I feel like the world is ending, like that's okay too. And then decide when you want to lean in, like, what, I'm ready for this fight today. I got it in me. Y'all get all the smoke. So, like, I feel like having that and being unapologetic about that has been helpful for me. But I would say I have I'm not using the word hope. Lately, I'm using the word, what is realistic, and then what is my role in the movement, right? Like, I feel like that's where I am, and that could be seen as pessimistic, and I recognize that. And so hopefully that's helpful and adds value and doesn't like send everyone over the edge before the weekend.
No, and the question is kind of dumb, if I'm honest. Like, I wasn't looking for a pep talk. Y'all are doing the work, and y'all give me hope. I mean, I just really appreciate the honesty and the real that you brought to that answer. And I think it is all of those things are right and can be, right?
Yeah. And I mean, it's like you said, it's no right answer. Like, all of these things can exist, and how we show up and like how we move through the work. So
right. Well, I don't think we have any additional questions. I don't know if there are any final thoughts that y'all. Yes, Sofia, Dr. Jawed-Wessel, that you'd like to add?
Mute. Okay, so I have something, and I won't, I will do my best not to like take up all the time that we have left with it, but I want us to be, okay, I know this is about abortion, but to me, it's this like objectification piece runs underneath all of it, right? And I really want us to be careful of not losing sight of the other areas that are related to this, but aren't directly necessarily about abortion, that are in the pipeline, if not for Nebraska, but we're seeing in plenty of other states, so eventually in Nebraska. But for us to really, really keep an eye on, legislation that like criminalizes pregnancy outcomes of any kind, so like if you see something that on the surface, you're like, oh yeah, like we don't want people who are pregnant to drink and use drugs. And so this law might discourage that. No, I want you to see through it and recognize that this is controlling the bodily autonomy of a pregnant person and punishing somebody for their birth outcomes in a way that's going to make them less likely to seek help if they have, a drug issue while pregnant. So they won't seek the help they need to limit that drug use or to limit binge drinking, et cetera, right? To really, really be skeptical of these bills that come out that seem to be, for protecting women or protecting, newborns, et cetera, and really question what is the motivation, what is the like systems level outcome of a law like this, to really think about the ways in which politicians are blurring contraception and abortion and limiting different contraceptive methods by calling them abortion. Those are really, really, really important. We've done this with IUDs. We've been doing this with emergency contraception, but now we're dipping into other forms of oral contraceptive because these politicians have a different definition of pregnancy than medical providers, So if implantation is prevented, they're saying that that's an abortion because fertilization had occurred, but the medical community disagrees. To them, and a pregnancy is a pregnancy once implantation occurs. So just really being mindful of the ways that they're playing word games and mind games with us, and not letting them get the best of us about these future pieces that we're going to be seeing.
Can I add to that, Dr. Sofia? Even of like folks saying, well, if we give you access to contraceptives, then you don't need abortions. Like you're right, they are really trying to be manipulative around language, and all of these policies, again, in spaces work together. So thank you for naming that, because that's so important.
Really important. Thank you for that broader view. Anyone else? Any other questions? Anything, Ash, you want to give us a closing?
I'm thankful for everyone that took time today to be on this call. And I'm really thankful for the partners in the work. I'm so appreciative of Dr. Sofia and just her legacy in this space. She's been doing this work, y'all, for a very long time without the recognition, without folks resourcing her or making sure and acknowledging her value add to the landscape, not only nationally, but specifically in Nebraska. And so this work is like thankless sometimes. People will run you ragged and then expect you to keep giving because, right, you're supposed to. And Dr. Sofia is just so supportive and available and is just, first off, brilliant, and so I just wanted to just thank you for being in this space with me. Don't look like that because you're gonna make me cry. I just got my lashes during this live. I just got my lashes done, so I will not be crying. But seriously, like this work can be thankless, and I just know what you give to this space. And so I am so honored to be on this panel with you. I'm so glad to work with you and be here. And again, for the folks and organizations that are institutionally here that can intentionally cut us and folks like Dr. Sofia and the folks like I Be Black Girl Out, like we deserve to be in this space. And so thank you to Women's Fund for always uplifting us, to ACLU for being good partners, and even Planned Parenthood. Andy and I have such good conversations now, and for her to be able to think about the harm that has been caused by Planned Parenthood, to want to reconcile that and be open to critical reflection, like those are the kinds of folks that I want to work with in this space. And so maybe that's what brings me hope, Tiff, of that, how we come collectively together to build this movement is going to be beautiful, and is just as important as the product that we put out, like that process and what it looks like. So I just wanted to publicly affirm you, Dr. Sofia, and the other partners in this work. So thank you.
Ditto, all of the above. Thank you.
That was lovely. All the feels, all the tears. I would just reiterate that we are so grateful to both of you for not only all of the work that you are doing in this space and all the way that you are leading the movement, broadening the movement, I love the way you talked about demanding a different future, Ash. And, this is how the work will get done, is by working together and to support the movement. And supporting this movement is not just using your voice, although that's important. It's also important resourcing the incredible people doing this work. So if you look back up in the chat, Jill had put links for MSHRC and IBVG in there. I think it's really important to not only support them with your words and your voice, but also your resources if that's available to you. We look forward to working with you, this movement, those of you who have taken the time today to join us, to demand a better future, to offer a future that recognizes humanity in all and values equity, autonomy, joy, and hope. We would encourage you, as we head into this legislative session, don't do nothing. The patriarchy is dependent upon you remaining silent. Don't get complacent. We need you to use your voice to speak up and to ensure that elected officials are working on behalf of that better future that is ahead of all of us. So please join the Women's Fund. Please follow these brilliant folks on social media and join their email lists and all of that thing. And also, I would just make a quick note that I'll be leaving the Women's Fund at the end of the month to take a new opportunity. I am so grateful for the ability to have been a part of this work at the Women's Fund. And there's a job, the best job available. So if you're into it, check it out. I hope you all get some rest in these next several weeks so we can be ready to demand something better come the next legislative session.